MTV launched in August 1981 and immediately became the most powerful tastemaker in music, which also made it the most powerful gatekeeper. What got played got remembered. What didn't play got buried. These are the 10 songs from the 1980s MTV Execs made sure you forgot. Number 10, Super Freak by Rick James.
She's a super freak, she's super freaky.
Rick James released Super Freak in August 1981, just as MTV was getting off the ground. The song went to number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 3 on the R&B chart. It had a music video, and MTV refused to play it.
Super freak, super freak. She's a
The channel's stated programming format was AOR, album-oriented rock, and its executives described the target audience as young rock fans in suburban markets. When Rick James came to them with Super Freak, they passed, citing the format rationale. Bob Pittman, one of MTV's founders, said publicly that Rick James was great, but that the channel's consumer research showed he wasn't defined as rock. James was furious. He gave interviews calling out the channel directly and became one of the most vocal critics of MTV's early programming policies.
when I get there, she's got incense, wine, and candles.
James had been signed to Motown's Gordy label and had been building a successful career since the late 1970s. Street Songs, the album containing Super Freak, went platinum multiple times and is widely regarded as one of the defining funk records of the decade. None of that mattered within the narrow definition of what MTV would rotate.
Super freak, girls are super freak. Yeah, yeah.
MTV's original head of talent and acquisition, Carolyn Baker, who was black herself, later acknowledged the channel's position was based on research that she described as rooted in ignorance. She said the team was young and cutting edge and didn't have to be on the cutting edge of racism, a quote that captures the ambiguity of how that era's exclusions worked. The decisions were sometimes structural, sometimes driven by format, and sometimes driven by something harder to name. The cruel irony is that Super Freak became one of the most sampled songs in history. MC Hammer's You Can't Touch This, in 1990, was built directly on its bass line, and that song reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 and won 2 Grammys. The original that made it all possible couldn't get airplay on the channel that was rewriting the rules of popular music.
She's a super freak, she's super freaky.
Number 9, Pull Up to the Bumper by Grace Jones.
Pull up to the bumper, baby, and you know that.
Grace Jones released Pull Up to the Bumper in June 1981 from her album Nightclubbing, and it reached number 2 on the US Billboard Hot Dance Club Songs chart. The song was influential, the video was striking, and Grace Jones was one of the most visually arresting performers in the world, at a time when visual presentation was becoming the entire game. MTV barely touched it. Jones had been working with producers Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare at Compass Point Studios in the Bahamas, creating a sound that blended reggae rhythms with post-disco and synth textures, in a way that was ahead of nearly everything else being released in 1981. Nightclubbing was widely reviewed and critically admired. Jones had developed one of the most distinctive visual identities in contemporary music, an androgynous, sculpted look that she created in collaboration with her longtime partner, photographer, and art director Jean-Paul Goude. The channel's failure to give Jones airtime stood in particularly sharp contrast to what happened next. By 1982, white British acts, Eurythmics, Duran Duran, Annie Lennox, were in constant rotation, and critics noted that their visual aesthetic and sound bore a clear debt to what Jones had been doing for years. The appropriation of an artist's innovations by other artists, who then received the industry infrastructure that the original artist was denied, is one of the recurring patterns in American music history. Jones herself was not in that rotation. She didn't find meaningful MTV presence until 1985, when a compilation album prompted a re-release of Pull Up to the Bumper, and she was eventually nominated for an MTV Award in 1986 for Slave to the Rhythm. The gap between 1981 and 1985 represents 4 years. in which MTV's audience was exposed to the aesthetic Jones had pioneered, through artists who had absorbed her influence, but not through Jones herself. Number 8. The Message, by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five.
Push me, 'cause I'm close to the...
Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five released The Message on July 1st, 1982. It is one of the most important recordings in the history of American popular music, a 7-minute piece of hip-hop that described the lived reality of inner-city poverty, with a directness and specificity that had no precedent on the pop charts. It reached number 4 on the US R&B chart and number 62 on the Hot 100. MTV did not play it. The channel's format excluded hip-hop entirely in its first several years. There was no category for it, no rotation slot, and no interest in developing one. The Message was not a genre niche, it was a landmark. It was written in 1980 by Duke Booty and Mel Mel in response to the New York City transit strike of that year, and to the broader conditions of life in the South Bronx during a period of urban decay and economic neglect. The song was later included in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
Grandmaster Flash had been pioneering DJ techniques in the South Bronx since the mid-1970s, cutting, mixing, and scratching, in ways that transformed what was possible with turntables. The Furious Five, alongside him, brought a vocal presence and lyrical sharpness to that foundation. By the time The Message was released, they were central figures in a musical movement that was already several years old and growing rapidly in influence. It was widely reviewed, widely discussed, and widely understood by critics who covered it as a turning point. None of that translated into MTV airtime. The channel would not launch its hip-hop dedicated program, Yo! MTV Raps, until August 1988, 6 full years after The Message had already drawn the map of what hip-hop could say and do.
Push me, 'cause I'm close to the...
Number 7. Planet Rock, by Africa Bambaataa and the Soulsonic Force. Africa Bambaataa released Planet Rock in 1982 on Tommy Boy Records, and it reached number 4 on the US R&B chart. The song fused the electronic sound of Kraftwerk, specifically their 1977 recording Trans-Europe Express, with hip-hop structure, Roland TR 808 drum machine programming, and Bambaataa's vision of music as a cross-cultural unifying force. It was a genuine work of synthesis, and it influenced electronic dance music for decades. MTV did not play it. Bambaataa had been a foundational figure in hip-hop since the early 1970s, organizing the South Bronx community around the universal Zulu nation and building a culture around music as an alternative to gang violence. He had grown up in the thick of that world and had consciously chosen to use music as a way to redirect the energy he saw around him. That context is inseparable from what Planet Rock accomplished. It was a utopian record, reaching across continents and genres to create something that argued music could unify people rather than divide them. Planet Rock is one of the most sampled records in the history of dance music. It laid the structural foundation for what would become techno, house, electro, and drum and bass. Its influence runs directly through every major development in electronic music in the following decades. Arthur Baker, who co-produced the track with John Roby, became one of the most important producers of the 1980s on the strength of what they built together. None of that was visible to a teenager watching MTV in 1982. The channel's format kept hip-hop invisible at exactly the moment hip-hop was doing some of its most consequential work, and Planet Rock is as strong an example of that as exists. Number 6. Sexual Healing, by Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye released Sexual Healing in October 1982. It went to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and won 2 Grammy Awards, Best R&B Song and Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, at the 1983 ceremony. It had a music video. MTV's rotation of it was minimal, particularly in comparison to the constant airplay that new wave and rock acts were receiving. The song was recorded in Belgium, where Gaye had relocated after a complicated period that included a difficult divorce, significant financial strain, and his departure from Motown after more than 2 decades. He signed with Columbia Records and completed Midnight Love, the album containing Sexual Healing, while abroad. The album reached number 7 on the Billboard 200. The single spent weeks on the charts and was one of the most played songs on American radio heading into 1983. Gaye had been one of the defining voices in American music since the early 1960s. His catalog encompassed some of the most celebrated soul recordings ever made, including What's Going On and Let's Get It On. Sexual Healing was his commercial comeback, and the song that reminded a new audience what he was capable of. For an artist of that stature, with a song of that size, to receive only marginal MTV attention, while less commercially successful rock acts cycled through heavy rotation, was a reflection of how completely the channel's format decisions overrode everything else. He died in April 1984, the day before his 45th birthday. Sexual Healing remains his last major hit, a number 3 song that deserved far more of the visual platform that was reshaping the entire industry in real time. Number 5. I Know What Boys Like by The Waitresses.
I know what boys like, I know what guys want.
The Waitresses released I Know What Boys Like in 1982. From their album, Wasn't Tomorrow Wonderful? The single peaked at number 62 on the Billboard Hot 100. But that modest chart position obscures how much airtime it got on college radio and alternative stations. The video received some MTV play, but the band, an indie act from Akron, Ohio, on an independent label without the promotional budget of a major, was never going to compete for rotation slots the way label-backed acts could. The Waitresses were led by vocalist Patty Donahue and built around the songwriting of Chris Butler. Their sound was sharp, angular post-punk with dry wit embedded in the lyrics. Donahue's vocal delivery was deliberately understated and a little wry. She sang the song as though the dynamic it described was amusing rather than frustrating, which gave it a quality that was genuinely unusual on pop radio in 1982. The band also recorded the theme song for the television series Square Pegs, which gave them a brief moment of wider visibility that year.
I know what boys like, I know what guys want.
MTV in 1982 was not a place where acts on small independent labels typically thrived. The channel's programming was increasingly shaped by record labels, with promotional departments large enough to push for rotation and music video budgets, large enough to produce the polished clips that made a good impression in that format. Romeo Void, The Waitresses, and a number of their contemporaries were doing work that was artistically sharper than a lot of what was in heavy rotation. But the machinery didn't exist to support them in the same way. Donahue passed away in 1996 at the age of 40. The band's catalog from this period sits in that particular category of music that people who caught it remember with complete clarity, and that everyone else missed entirely.
I know what boys like, I know what guys want.
Number 4. Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. This is the entry that frames everything else on this list, because Billie Jean is not a forgotten song. It is one of the most recognized recordings in history. What deserves to be remembered is how it got onto MTV in the first place, and what that episode says about the 9 songs above it. Michael Jackson's Thriller album was released in November 1982, and Billie Jean was released as a single in January 1983. Jackson's record label CBS Records wanted the Billie Jean video aired on MTV. MTV declined, citing its rock format. Jackson had already sold millions of records and was one of the most successful artists in the world. It didn't matter. CBS Records president Walter Yetnikoff told MTV that if they didn't air Billie Jean, he would pull every CBS Records artist from the channel, never provide them with videos again, and would tell the press publicly that MTV had refused to play a black artist. MTV caved and put the video in heavy rotation on March 10, 1983. What followed was one of the most dramatic commercial chain reactions in music history. Billie Jean, became one of the most viewed videos in MTV's early history. It was followed by Beat It, and then by the full Thriller short film. MTV's audience expanded dramatically, and the channel's own executives later acknowledged that the Jackson videos had transformed the network's reach and cultural position. The lesson it carried was stark. The artists on this list had no Walter Yetnikoff. Rick James had no one threatening to pull an entire major label's catalog. Grace Jones had no one with the leverage to force the channel's hand. Grandmaster Flash and Marvin Gaye and Africa Bambaataa and all the others simply did not have a record label large enough and powerful enough to make the threat stick. The door opened for Michael Jackson. For most of the others, it stayed closed for years. Number 3. Electric Avenue by Eddie Grant. Eddie Grant released Electric Avenue in 1982, and it reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1983. It was one of the biggest pop hits of that year. Grant was a Guyana-born artist who had been in the music industry since the 1960s as a member of the UK pop group The Equals, before embarking on a solo career. He had built his own recording studio, Coach House, in Barbados, and owned his own Torpedo Records label, giving him a degree of creative and financial independence that was unusual for any artist of his era, and particularly unusual for a black artist. The song was written in response to the Brixton riots of April 1981, civil unrest in South London that erupted after years of tension between the black community and the Metropolitan Police. Grant was writing about something real and specific, grounding the song in an actual street in Brixton, where violence had occurred and where the community had long been economically marginalized. That political context was not front and center in how the song was heard by most American audiences, but it was there in every note. Electric Avenue got MTV Airplay in 1983. It was one of the very few non-rock tracks by a black artist to receive it before the shift caused by Billie Jean. By mid-1983, the channel was slowly beginning to adjust its posture, and a song as commercially undeniable as Electric Avenue was difficult to exclude entirely. But Grant's broader catalog received almost no attention, and his story remained largely invisible to the MTV generation. The song eventually reached a new audience through sampling and cultural references, but in the early 1980s, it navigated an obstacle course that most black artists couldn't clear. Number 2. Rocket by Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock released Rocket in 1983 from his album Future Shock, and it became a significant chart and club hit. The music video, directed by Godley and Krem, featuring mechanical robotic legs performing scratching motions in a surreal domestic setting, won 5 MTV Video Music Awards at the 1984 ceremony, including Best Concept Video and Best Direction. It was one of the earliest hip-hop-influenced tracks to achieve real mainstream video success on the channel. It was also treated as an isolated event rather than an opening. Hancock was already a jazz legend by 1983, a former member of the Miles Davis Quintet, the composer of Watermelon Man and Cantaloupe Island, and the creator of the landmark 1973 album Headhunters, which had helped bring jazz closer to funk and popular music. When he collaborated with producer Bill Laswell and DJ Grandmixer DST on Future Shock, he was deliberately attempting to bridge his jazz roots with the emerging hip-hop and electronic music scenes. The scratching on Rocket was performed by Grandmixer DST, one of the founding figures of hip-hop DJ culture, and the song introduced that technique to millions of people who had never heard it before. That the video won multiple VMAs was genuinely significant, but it was also anomalous. The channel celebrated Rocket in the way it would celebrate a curiosity, a stunning, accomplished thing that stood apart from everything else in rotation. Hancock and Grandmixer DST were black artists from hip-hop and jazz backgrounds, and the world they came from continued to receive little sustained attention from the channel in the years that followed. The awards were real and deserved. The follow-through that should have come with them did not arrive. Number 1. Never Say Never by Romeo Void. Romeo Void released Never Say Never in 1982 from their album Benefactor on 415 Records, an independent San Francisco label. The song received significant college radio airplay and became a club staple, but its chart position was modest. It peaked at number 89 on the Billboard Hot 100 because the mechanisms that drove major commercial success in 1982 were increasingly tied to MTV. And Romeo Void was not a band MTV's programmers were going to prioritize. The band was fronted by vocalist Deborah Eyal, who had a commanding, unconventional stage presence and an approach to lyrics that was direct and a little unsettling in the best possible way. Their sound was angular post-punk with saxophone laid over it, a combination that felt distinctive and urgent in the early 1980s. The saxophone was played by Benjamin Bossi, and it gave Never Say Never a quality that set it apart from the synthesizer-driven new wave that dominated the channel's rotation. Never Say Never had a music video, and it did receive some MTV airplay. But the difference between some airplay and heavy rotation was enormous in this period. Heavy rotation in 1982 and 1983 could turn an unknown act into a household name. Modest airplay could give a band a fan base on college campuses and in underground clubs without translating to broader commercial breakthrough. Romeo Void lived in that second category. They had the sound, the video, and the critical recognition. What they didn't have was a major label willing to spend the promotional resources to fight for rotation slots, or a profile that fit the channel's dominant demographic model. The band broke up in 1984. Eyal later pursued a career as a visual artist. Never Say Never has been rediscovered by successive generations of listeners, and it holds up completely. A record that sounds as precise and alive as it did in 1982, and that would have reached a much wider audience if the machinery had been pointed in its direction. MTV built a generation's musical memory, and the structure of that memory was shaped by decisions made in programming meetings in the early 1980s. What the channel chose to play became the soundtrack of a decade. What it chose not to play, the R&B, the hip-hop, the indie post-punk, the black artists who didn't fit a narrowly defined format, formed a shadow catalog that ran parallel to the official one, heard on college radio and in clubs, remembered intensely by the people who found it, and invisible to everyone who didn't. The songs on this list are part of that shadow catalog. Some of them eventually found their audiences through other means. Some never did, not in the way they deserved. All of them are worth hearing today, on their own terms, without the gatekeeping that kept them out of the rotation in the first place. If any of these brought something back, or introduced you to something new, drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.